Hey guys, I'm here with Staci Sprout, therapist, awesome lady, and author of Naked in Public, which is just a scandalous title. I love it. So I love it, Staci. I love it. First time I heard it, I was like, wait, her book's called what?
Oh, I can tell you the story of that title. It's pretty funny.
Do. Okay, so Staci, tell us about you. Tell us about your book.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with you, Lacey. I really enjoy hanging out with you and talking with you and learning from you. And so thanks for having me on this interview. And let's see, I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm 48 years old. I'm here at my whimsical home office with purple walls.
I love it.
Thank you. I love it too. I've got a dog on my lap. Hopefully he'll stay sleeping. Um, yeah, I'm a female. I call myself a recovered sex and love addict, which I know is another controversial term, which we could talk about if you're interested. But
Let's talk about recovered versus recovering. I love it.
okay, now or later?
Oh, later's fine. You finish
Okay.
telling us about your book and
Oh,
how
my.
you came up with that title. I'm actually, now that I know there's a story, I must know the story.
Okay. Well, I have to tell you, so part of my sex addiction was to be very shameless about my sexuality. Legal, but exhibitionism, really trying to get attention for and power around my sexuality. And so I started recovery in 2001. And that's when I had my awakening of, uh-oh, there's something really out of balance here. And so I started getting information about this concept of sobriety and what does it mean to have boundaries and what's leaky sexual energy and how do you pull that in. And so it was a world of hurt, but also a fantastic time of exploration. And so over time, so now it's 2018, so over probably the 10 years of recovery, I changed so much and I actually became pretty modest in terms of my dress and definitely working really hard to contain my sexual energy unless I was in a committed relationship and was consenting. And so by the time I went to start my memoir, which I started in 2012, I hired a writing coach and I said, I'm going to get serious about this. And I was dating an amazing man, and he happened to have written some books. Pat Means, he wrote Men's Secret Wars and a couple others. And so he had already published a book, and I said, I want to do it. He says, you should do it. And so he was very supportive. And so I got going, and I had a bunch of titles, and one of them was Tears of Light. And this actually behind me, this picture was representative of that experience, because so much of my recovery was about grief, but also kind of the light of the divine shining through and holding me so I could grieve. But anyway, um, so a lot of people said that's not a great title. No one would want to read that book. And so I was trying to balance, what my heart message was with having a book that has some appeal and basically is easy to remember. And so one of the themes that started to emerge as I talked through the book, which was mostly written before I came up with the final title, was this concept of vulnerability. And that I was sharing my story, and it was so vulnerable. I felt like I was going to be naked in public, like that kind of emotional vulnerability. And then I think it was my sister I was talking with at the time, and we kind of had this, oh my gosh, that's the title, that's it, naked in public, like a dream that you have, that and you feel, but you're choosing to risk, like a deliberate choosing to reveal the heart of my sex and love addiction recovery and the abuse and neglect that was part of that. And so then I started to know spiritually, kind of through prayer and contemplation and meditation, like that's it, that's the title. And I got really scared about that because it was so immodest and just out there. And what will people think? And
It's naughty. It's for sure naughty. I love it.
well, and I talked to Marnie Free about it because I was really scared. And I said, Marnie, I'm scared. My title is so provocative. And she said, Staci, it's evocative. And there's a difference. And actually that was really helpful for me. It was like it evokes certain emotion and thought and curiosity, which is, I wanted that. And you want that for a title, or you want your title to be exactly what you're trying to do in some way. But I hadn't told my husband yet. And so I didn't know what to do, because I knew God was like, yep, this is your title. And it's okay to edge out a little bit in this way, because when someone picks up the book, they're going to get them, they'll get your story in there. So I couldn't tell him, I couldn't say anything. So I printed out a mock cover, and I put it on the manuscript, because we'd been reading, copies and editing and such. And I said, honey, I've got my title. Now, Pat is a natural marketer. He's really good at that. Like Men's Secret Wars is a great title. He just knows a good title when he hears it. So he has his marketing brain and his husband brain. And so I said, okay, I found the title and I'm ready to tell you what it is. He goes, okay. So we're at breakfast, and I had it on the manuscript, and I just slid it across the table toward him. And he looked down, and he looks at this title, and he looks up and he goes, great title. It was like the marketer in him won out, and he was like, all right, I get it, and so anyway, that's how we came up with a title.
I love it. You also have a great subtitle. What's your subtitle?
Well, that gets at the issue of the temporary. So, a memoir of recovery from sex addiction and other temporary insanities.
Yes. That's my favorite. Well, besides Naked in Public, because it's just so epically naughty and accurate. But no, I love it. I love your title. And the other temporary insanities, I just latched onto that and was like, yes, I'm insane right now. It's temporary. Mm-hmm. I just felt like that for me, like the Naked in Public totally caught my eye. And I was like, okay. But that other temporary insanities for me was so validating that, oh, good, this isn't like the rest of my life. This isn't all that I am. It was so validating, for lack of a better word. It's just really great for me to read that part of your title.
Thank you.
Okay, she gets it. She gets it. So that was
well,
cool.
The subtitle, it was important to me to use the word sex addiction in there because I wanted to just snap open the conversation. I'm passionate about breaking that taboo that we can't talk about it. And I know there's so much shame that women feel. And it doesn't apply to every woman. Not every woman likes that label. But I want to be really clear that that's what I struggled with, and that was what my story of recovery was about. So I wanted to use the term sex addiction, but I wanted to say it was temporary. And yeah, I felt crazy. Insanity, like not healthy. Like Santos is health or Sanos health, and so I wasn't healthy, but it was temporary. And I feel like my sexuality is really healthy now, and I'm proud of it, and I want to carry that message that is possible for women.
Yeah.
And men.
And men. I love it. Okay, so we had a fun little chat just a few minutes ago before we jumped on. And so I'll share again what I learned from Dr. Hilton, and then let's kind of go from there. So I was at a Lifestar conference. They had an open to the public keynote, where Dr. Hilton spoke. And so, of course, I went because I'm totally a Dr. Hilton groupie. And my forwarding author and our mutual friend, Forrest Benedict, was there. And he's like, hey, you got to come. And so I went, got to actually meet him in the flesh, which I haven't done before, and listen to Dr. Hilton. It was amazing. And Dr. Hilton did a Q&A at the end. And so I'm not shy. So I stood up. I got to ask a question, and I was like, okay, Dr. Hilton, help me out here. I hear that women who want different recovery, women who feel like they're not getting what they need from the current programs, like sex addiction from some people, they say it's different for women. Some people say we're just trying to be unique and we're just trying to get attention. And then I'll just leave who said that out. And at the same time, there are women who say, I can handle porn. And this is really where a lot of my question came from. They're like, I can handle porn because I'm not a guy. Like, guys get addicted to porn, women don't. So can you speak to that? And he said, yes, they do. Women can get addicted to porn. And what he explained just really helped clear it up for me. And we had just had this long conversation about the neuroscience of addiction. It was really cool. And he said, the pathway to addiction for men and women is the same. How we get there, like the arousal, the amygdala, that's the same. What's different is the reward system. Men's reward system is instant. He called it a microwave. He's like, men have a microwave reward system. Sex, porn, yay, I'm good, right? But women have more of a slow cooker reward system. And that is different. And that recovery looks different and feels different. And so I love that. And I felt totally validated and vindicated. I'm like, Dr. Hilton said it, and he studies the brain under a microscope. So I loved that. So we were kind of talking about that. Tell me your thoughts and your experience with women in recovery as it pertains to that.
Well, my experience is not as a scientist. I am more of a social scientist, a psychotherapist. So in my role, I mean, I have the two versions of my own recovery and all the women I've known since 2001 who've been in sex and love addiction recovery. But then since 2006, I started becoming a specialty therapist in the field, working with women and men who were struggling with sex, love addiction, romance, porn, other kinds, fantasy addiction, etc. So in that, from that perspective, the difference between men and women, what I'll say is first, the very first thing I noticed as a clinician is that women did not respond to the same therapeutic interventions in the same way as men did. So in a general rule, and there's always exceptions, but in a general rule, so a classic version of that is I came back from my training from the International Institute of Trauma and Addictions Professionals, and I had these great tools, including one called the PICI, which stands for the Personal Craziness Index. And you track your daily personal craziness. And I handed it out to all the women in my brand new women's group, and they said, no.
No.
No, we're not going to use this. We do not want to be called crazy, and we are not going to call ourselves crazy. And then I said, oh, of course. And so I called ITAP. I said, hey, I'm going to revise this. I'm going to call it the Personal Care Index. I'm going to use it for women. Is that okay? They said, go ahead. Just, original attribution, which is great. So anyway, so I've used the Personal Care Index since then to try to help women to overcome the shame of being called crazy and just get to own that they're learning to care for themselves, because the socialization is always to care for others. And yeah, it can make us feel crazy, but so that's just a small example of some of the clinical tool changes that I have needed to make. And so really I've developed a separate clinical program for women. And in fact, that's what I'm working on right now, is a pilot training program so I can train therapists in some alternative female-informed approaches so that women feel seen and heard. And one of the things I just finished is called a daughter's impact statement. And it's a tool to help daughters to kind of tick their minds about ways that they've been impacted by their parents, and so that they can be clear about what boundaries they may need to set to get safe. So even just the term, I mean, I've had an impact statement for years. I've used it with partners, but even just writing on there, things, the word daughter is just part of being inclusive and saying, this is a tool just for you. And daughters are different than sons. And these are some ways you might be affected. And so those are, that's a main way as a therapist that I have seen some differences. And as a recovering woman, I think I tended to be more of what they would call a classic sex addict, in terms of my behaviors looked more typically like men did. And so I identified with the kind of the language that I heard, even though it was fairly, created by men for men, I often related to that language myself. So coming into recovery and getting to know other women and seeing them in my practice, they have educated me a lot about, in fact, I am in the minority of women, and that the majority of women, and I think this gets back to Donald Hilton's brain studies, our brains are different typically. They're far more reward based on relationship. So trust is essential in a therapeutic relationship. Trust more than tools. I mean, I started talking about tools, but it's got to be trust first. And they need a community of women around them and feedback from women, particularly in order to heal not only the trauma, but the identity issues. And so I've seen that much more with women than men. Men do really well in groups, but they bond pretty quickly. Women in my groups have taken longer to bond and build that trust. But once they do, it is at a profoundly deep level because their brains are there. Their capacities for intimacy are just off the charts. And it's so beautiful to see. So those are the things that come to mind first in terms of some of the differences and how I guess how I'll say we, because you're developing tools for women all the time, are trying to catch the field up to care for women in a way that's effective.
Well, and I love what you said about like it's exactly what Dr. Hilton said. That reward system for women is slower, and we take time to build up trust. And can I trust this woman? Am I safe with her? And then like we risk a little bit, and we don't like risk. Did you notice that? We don't like it. It's a 4-letter word.
Like, well, the intimacy risk is like, oh, I can't afford to be hurt like that. Yeah.
No, I can't be seen. I can't be understood. You can't really know who I am. There's no way you could love me. Just, it's so scary. So scary. And I think that's not, while men might experience that to a degree, I think we lead with that fear a lot of the time, especially coming into recovery, because we've been, I don't know about the women you work with, but a lot of them I work with have been traumatized sexually by a partner, by random stranger, by a loved one, a close loved one. And that's a lot of deep pain that a lot of men don't have to deal with. They don't have to take their power back sexually in a healthy way. They just need to learn to manage that power. And that's something that I've noticed is really a big deal, is that once the women I'm working with feel empowered sexually, they start to make way better decisions because they're not trying to steal power from men. Now they're trying to walk gracefully and compassionately in the power they've always had as beautiful sexual beings. It's just awesome. And I love where the field is headed right now. Love it. So amazing. Yep. And so many women who have been there now are stepping up like us as coaches, as authors, as therapists, as scientists and researchers. It's incredible. It's so neat to see.
It is fantastic. I agree.
So cool. Okay, so let's talk about, attachment healing. Let's talk about attachment healing. One of my favorite things. Like, I'm constantly listening to Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk and reading up on Bowlby and Ainsworth. Just love the attachment stuff. So I want to hear from you, your take on the whole attachment theory and attachment recovery, all of that.
Well, I'll tell you, I did not get formal training as an attachment kind of theory therapist. I got attachment in school some, but I felt like I was doing some catch up on like, what's this attachment thing and how does it relate? I got a lot more training on sex and love addiction, but the overlap of love addiction, love avoidance, and then the issue of attachment style it's really kind of first got my attention through the work of Kelly McDaniel and Ready to Heal, because she did this fantastic study, which is looking at women who self-identified as sex addicts and women who self-identified as love addicts and how they were attached to their mothers. And what she found is the women who more identified as sexually acting out, maybe through porn or anonymous sexual encounters or lots of partners, but it was more focused on sex than relationship, those women had avoidant attachment style, and they had virtually no attachment to their mothers. So in their childhood, their mothers were unavailable, off the charts. And I related to that because my mom, I believe as a trauma survivor, was incredibly dissociated. So she just couldn't be present. And so I didn't form a bond with her. In fact, I was very avoidant because my attempts to attach with her were met with that pain of, she can't be there. And so in the other side of the study, the women who showed up more as the love addict types, not so avoidant, but more of kind of going into the needy place or the initiating, or some of the ambivalent kind of back and forth anxious attachment. They had an anxious attachment with their mothers. So their mothers were there sometimes and other times not. So for me, that's when the attachment theory really became very powerful, because it tied in to what I experienced and what I was seeing. Um, we do some evaluation of attachment style and family style in the certified sex addiction therapist testing. And we look at this high frequency of families where the families were very rigid in their rules and very disengaged in terms of attachment. So that's we see that a lot with sex addiction in general, those kind of family structures, high rigidity, but not really emotionally attuned, which is what promotes the bonding and the attachment. And the other two resources that have really come alive for me around attachment has been one, in fact, I'm going to show you a book. I love books and book covers, so I'm going to go off camera for a second.
Okay. I do the same thing. I've got all mine on the shelf right there, so I'm just like, oh, it's that one.
So this is a book called Mean Mothers, and it's a must read. It's hard to read because the subtitle is Overcoming the Legacy of Hurt, and the author is Peg Streep. I hope I'm saying that right. But she talks about attachment in this book, Family Scripts and Roles, and how that influences what happens later. Yes. So that for me was a great source and you can read it and learn more about it if you want, if you haven't read it, but just in how the legacy of attachment through generations impacts a woman. So reading that book actually inspired me to both grieve for my mother and both my grandmothers, but also feel more compassion for them because of what they went through and the strife and difficulty and how little resources they had. Wow. So the other resource I really like around attachment is the work of Stan Tatkin. And he has two books, and this Mean Mothers is pretty easy to read, I feel. It's not written by a therapist. He's an MD, so it's a little harder to read at times for me, kind of clinical, but also pretty accessible. And his books are, one is called Wired for Love, and the other one is Wired for Dating. So anyone's dating, Wired for Dating is a great resource. So I'll defer to some of the people who are just more knowledgeable in the area of attachment, but those are my favorite sources for more intel. And I think ultimately when I come back to myself, it's about, and I try to teach this to my clients as well, what is my attachment style? Yeah. Like figuring it out, which Mean Mothers is a good way to read and kind of figure it out. Oh, there's one more book called Attached, which was, I think, a national bestseller, where it has a little quiz about find your attachment style. But anyway, figure out what your cycle is about attachment, and then start to learn to recognize it in your relationships and start to talk about it. I mean, you're good at that. You're really good at talking about when you feel safe, and if you're struggling or something, you're just super open about that. And I think it's fantastic because for me as an avoidant, it's harder to be vulnerable. But when I can say, ooh, I'm feeling avoidant. Ooh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Ooh, I need a break. Like just trying to language that as really just a need that I have. Maybe it's a need for space. Maybe it's a need for reassurance, whatever it is, and being in safe relationships where I can learn to identify, speak that out, get my needs met, and hang out with other people who do the same thing so they can teach me about themselves and I can learn more about myself. And we just have it as part of the conversation, and it doesn't have to be this hidden secret.
Yeah. Well, and I love all of that, and I wrote down a couple of new books I'm getting.
So. I know, I have so many books.
My husband's like, stop it. And I'm going, but I still have space. He's like, you have 4 bookcases. You don't still have space. Like, yeah, but your games are on one of them. Like,
yeah.
You can have space with your games. They're mostly my games, but that's beside the point.
Oh, you're a gamer.
Oh man, do I love games. Oh yeah. Bring on the Dominion every day of the week. Oh
wow. I don't know that one.
Oh, it's a card game. It is awesome. I'm totally hooked. It might be my new addiction. I don't know. My kids are like, Mom, there are other games. And I'm like what?
There is no other
I don't
game.
believe you. It's great. But so back to the attachment. I want to get a hold of that study you were talking about. Tell me the name of that study again that talks to those who identify as sex addicts versus those who identify as love addicts. Do you remember who that was?
Kelly McDaniel.
Okay.
And she wrote about it in Ready to Heal.
Okay. Ready to Heal. Yeah, that one sounds good because it's like anxious attachment. It's crazy making. And like always so stressful. And I'm like, do people like me? Like, so much anxiety. And that I think is why it was so huge for me I had a female therapist I was able to solidly attach to a few years ago. And I remember coming into her one time and she's basically like, okay, this is the epitome of how you attach. Like, we need to work on this. But I went in and I was like, I think I have a crush on you. And she's like, okay, tell me more about that. Right?
So available. Didn't freak out.
Yeah, she's like, tell me more about that. And I'm like, okay, I've never thought of kissing another girl before. And she's like, okay, you've thought about kissing me. I'm like, don't say it out loud.
We can't talk about it. It'll make it real. Yeah.
I'm like, stop. And she's like, okay, what else? And I'm like, I had a dream. And she's like, okay, what did you dream? I'm like, oh, I'm not telling you that. Right? I'm like, no. She's like, okay. First of all, you're not all of a sudden attracted to women. Like, you don't actually want to have a sexual relationship with me. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I was wondering how I never knew I liked girls. She's like, this is absolutely normal. And the fact that you're freaking out is just further proof that you have an anxious attachment. She's like, I can handle this. Not a huge deal. Of course this happened. And in fact, good job being so open about it. And we're going to work through this. And you're going to come in and see me next week. I'm like, oh no, I'm never coming back.
Oh, you were so vulnerable.
No, yeah. She's like, you're going to come back in next week and be like, well, that was a thing. And she's like, chances are you're probably going to be totally over it in a week or two and wonder what the big deal was. And she was absolutely right.
That's what happened.
But having it normalized, she said, when you were a little girl, you never got to fall in love with your mom. And usually little girls have these feelings for their mom when they're like 3 and 4, but they don't know what romance and sexuality feels like. And so they just really get bonded to and attached to their moms. It's totally natural. You never were able to do that. And so you're just going through it now, but you're freaking out because you're a 30-something-year-old woman sitting in a room with a 40-something-year-old woman, and all of a sudden you think you've got a crush on me. And I was like, oh, so I'm not really attracted to you. She's like, you're bonding and connecting and it's good for you. Just relax. And I'm like, no way, dude. But I did. I was like, she's like, just like once the shock wears off, breathe and just relax into the feelings of safety and connection and a loving female relationship. Because you know I'm not going to hurt you and you've never had that before. And she was exactly right. A couple of weeks later, I seriously did have to take 2 weeks. After you say something like that for your first time to a woman, you freak out. And I was like, I'll be back in 2 weeks. I really can't handle this. But I was fine. Like I really was. And it was like 2-3 days later, I went, that was a thing. Now I know what that feels like. And yeah, totally over it. But that allowed me to then deeply and intimately connect with my husband and my adopted mom. I was like, guess what I know how to do now? Yeah. I know how to be in love with women. And it was the most amazing thing for me to witness and have witnessed and talk about and validate that very natural, necessary attachment, and then go, and wow, I understand how a whole lot of other people feel now. You know, like being attracted to women is not something I deal with every day of my life. It's something I dealt with for a week of my life. But all of a sudden, I'm going, wow, so many more things about life and love and attachment and recovery make sense now. It was incredibly powerful.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that beautiful story of healing and attachment transformation.
It was awesome. And I did go back and I'm like, yeah, I'm not really sexually attracted to you. She's like, I know. Like,
you didn't turn out to be bisexual or lesbian. That just wasn't what was going on.
Right. Not, she's like, you don't wake up one morning in your mid to late 30s going, I like girls. She's like, that's not how it happens. And so it's, yeah, it was, I guess there's just like, there's so much gratitude, and oh, it's just so amazing when women are able to have that deep attachment and learn to fall in love with other women, and to hold that in a sacred and boundaried and accepting space. So powerful.
Yeah, beautiful.
So, I think I've calmed down now.
I really appreciate that story, and I'm glad to hear it. And I know it will be helpful for many people to hear it, because the question of, is this feeling that is so powerful, is this romance? Is this sexual attraction? Like, I'm having this dream. Is that what that means? And then getting to talk it through and sort out what it really means is just a beautiful healing experience. I'm glad you have it, and I look forward to more people getting to talk about these things as we get the courage. I think it took a lot of courage on your part to really admit it and to let that be out there, and just let go of, I don't know what this means, and then to work it through and go, oh, now I do, and I'm confident. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to validate for any women listening, and even men, like, it's not comfortable to lean into something like that and to relax into it and go, I'm going to let this mean whatever it means in this moment, this anxiety, this tension, this fear, and this overwhelming sense of connection and wanting to know and be with and understand another human being. That, like, it's normal, and to have all of the really intense feels come along with it, and to think, am I insane? Like, where's this coming from? And just go, okay, it's coming from a place that's trying to heal, and how can I love myself inside of it without running away from it again? Because it was clearly, there was a reason I did not have that attachment as a little girl. And I don't have to fully understand what happened there and what that was, just to know that, okay, I didn't get that. I wasn't able to make that connection with women. And so I've always been uncomfortable around women. And now creating groups and bringing women together and helping them to have similar experiences is one of the most rewarding parts of working with women. And so I'd like to know, like, how do you help women work through the intensity of learning to trust other women? Because stuff comes up and we get catty. So,
Well, I have tried over the years many different groups, therapy groups for women. I mean, in my personal life, I did volunteer work in 12-step program service work to try to work with women and bring women together. So I did a women's outreach service committee, and I did experience a great deal of meanness in that setting, and side taking and in group out group, and some of the very painful, I would say, symptoms of attachment disorder. And I try to bring people together. I love to network and bring groups together, and I can be overly optimistic at times, but I just felt like my higher power, my spirit, was saying, do this. And and I can be a mediator sometimes when there's conflict or trouble. And so I did my best to try to be a mediating force there. And ultimately, I ended up leaving that service commitment, but we got some stuff done. And I was grateful for that. So it's messy, you know, life's messy, and we're all doing the best we can. And so as a therapist, when I tried to bring together my first group of women, I didn't understand how deep the wounding was. And the group just didn't bond. And I kept wanting them to, but they didn't. And so what I learned is I had to have a better relationship with each individual woman before I could try to bring them together. Because as therapy group, I was the hub of the wheel at first. I was in the center, and they were being brave enough to try to trust me. And they didn't trust each other, and they shouldn't have necessarily. I mean, that trust has to be earned. And so then over time, they got to practice intimacy and some trial and error with each other, with me in the therapy role as a mediating force, and trying to help them to talk about, I felt uncomfortable, I felt mad, I felt sad, I felt scared when I saw this, and what I thought was this, and would you be willing, or what was your truth, or just to have those difficult conversations that would lead to deeper intimacy when everyone would hang in there with it. And so that over time proved to be successful, where the women would start to work through conflicts, bond more, realize they're going to hang in there. And then I would just slowly back out of the center of the wheel and say, look, you can connect. And they're calling or texting each other outside a group, and they're forming friendships. And that ultimately the goal of all therapy is for people to graduate and say, I don't need that anymore. I got what I needed. And I love it when that happens. I have a group that, a lot of the members of the group just stop the group and they form their own just women's gathering, and they still meet. And so they don't have to pay anyone for that. They just know how to do it. So seeding those gatherings is super rewarding for me. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And my experience has been very, very similar with first I start in the middle and I let them all learn to trust me, and then I start to back out and point them, like intentionally point them to each other and tell them, okay, I'm going to start pointing you guys to each other because I can't be here forever for you, but you can keep each other, and it's awesome. It's amazing. And to have them be like, oh yeah, I was talking to so-and-so. And it's like 6 months after group and they're having this deep connection and you're like, yay! It's so cool. It's so rewarding. So rewarding. I love it. Love it. Okay, we've had some good chat. Okay, so now if you could just share about the personal care I do want you to share about the personal care index, if you wouldn't mind. But you mentioned something else to me previously, sneaky sexual energy. You said that earlier, and I was like, let's talk about sneaky sexual energy. It sounds like naked in public.
Oh, well, I think what I thought I said, although I may have said sneaky, I thought I said leaky.
Oh,
I like sneaky too.
Let's call it sneaky.
Yeah, leaky and sneaky. It's like, where is
okay?
I mean, because so for me, a primary drug of choice in my addictive brain and life experience was energy, was the chemical hits that I would get. So I wasn't the most outwardly, overtly promiscuous person in the world. I didn't have, so many women have more partners now that it's just normalized. But for me, what I was doing 24/7, every chance I could, was I was looking for that hit. I was looking at the gas station, the grocery store, at church, anywhere I could. And I didn't realize that to some people it was actually really obvious. I thought I was being sneaky. I didn't really think about it too much, but I wasn't, and I could kind of hold on to that idea of I'm a good girl. And that Kelly McDaniel talks about the core beliefs of female sex and love addicts, and one of them is, I can't be sexual if I'm going to be good, but I have to be desirable to be a woman. And so it's so confusing, all the double binds. But anyway, so and we talked about this a little bit when I interviewed you on Sex Addiction in the News and I know not everyone is comfortable with this, but of there's a certain toxic kind of engagement that I would initiate with men. With women, I was much more competitive. So I would look, do the once over, and then judge.
Mhm.
Uh, but with men, I would look, try to grab the gaze and pull it in. I was like a sexual vampire. I mean, it sounds terrible, but energetically, that is what I was doing constantly. And it wasn't until I got in recovery that I realized it. But I could do it surreptitiously. If I went to a dance, I was catching men's eyes who were dancing with other women, or I would make sure my partner didn't see me. But if I was at a party, I would do it with other men at the party and at the punch bowl. Or so that was a way. It's kind of not as obvious. Although once I got into recovery and I started doing it at 12-step sexual recovery meetings, it was very obvious to a lot of the men there because they avoided me like the plague. They wouldn't sit by me. They wouldn't look at me. It was actually my first experience of men having healthy boundaries was going into a room of people trying to recover and I'm in my disease, just like doing what I always did. And they're just, nope. And so for a long time, I felt pretty lonely, but they were taking care of themselves. And
Yeah.
then eventually I started to realize, wait, in fact, it was at a gas station one day. I had learned the concept of intrigue and eye gaze, which goes back to the attachment
Mhm.
because I didn't get my attachment needs met. So that's how I was, it was a kind of a surrogate toxic attachment hit. Never enough, but always trying. And I realized, oh, I've got to stop that thing I'm doing, that looking thing. And some people called it lustful looking, but I wasn't just looking like looking at a man's body to get a lust hit. I was looking to try to get his gaze and trying to get his objectification of me. Like that's how I was feeling like, oh, I'm good, I'm sexy, I'm powerful, that soul in power. And I was at a gas station and I was pumping my car with gas, and this guy pulled up behind me and he gets out of his car. Well, that's in my old addictive thinking, that's opportune time. And I was like, I started to do it, and then I'm like, don't do it. Like, look away. And I was looking away, pumping my gas, and I could feel him right there. Like, he's right there because I'm sensitive that way. And I'm like, don't look, don't look, don't look, And that was the beginning of my recovery in that way. And I'm so grateful for the awareness because it was really unconscious.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sitting here just resonating with so much of that going, yeah, that moment we realize that a healthy man can pick up on that and then they avoid us, we're like, it's mortifying.
I know how
Oh no,
embarrassing. I've been doing this my whole life. And
I know, and I didn't know. Yeah. Well, that's one thing I've recognized with women a lot is that it's not intentional, but they are constant boundary crossers.
that's right.
They're,
Intrusive.
yeah, yeah. And it's not, and then as they wake up, we have to be very careful because they can go into massive shame. We're going,
Yeah.
hey, just remind yourself you were not consciously trying to cause harm.
And
And
I
you did cause harm.
Yeah, that's a very adult concept. How do you hold both? I think that gets into people say, addiction's not a moral issue. And on one hand, I go, well, it's not only a moral issue. Like someone's not bad at their core, but we do cause harm to others.
Yeah.
And how do we hold all of that? And what I say to people early in recovery is like, right now, just try your best, just try to not do those things that are killing you and killing your relationships. And, gradually we'll come to the bigger understanding of what all this means. And if there's amends to be made, you'll make them. It's okay. But for now, just take care, back to that personal care of self and try to figure out what those boundaries are and practice them. And to me, it helps to have compassion for myself when I do think about that little baby me or that little girl me who just was looking for love. And at some point when I hit puberty and I found that concept of sexuality, and there was lots of unfortunate, covert sexual boundary violations, even in my home, like that's where I learned it. And and I just was trying to use whatever power I could to try to feel okay. And I think that goes on for a lot of women, and I feel compassion for them because going back to something you talked about, this is a very sexually oppressive society for women.
Yeah.
And there's tons of messaging that that's what you do. If you want to be a woman, you got to be sexy and get everyone to look at you. So even if you didn't have, kind of incest, either covert or overt incest in your family, it's easy to pick those messages up in public from rock stars and celebrities, and people don't realize the concept of how intrusive that is. I think we're sort of forced to look at that in recovery because we go to extremes. But it's happening out there all the time. These kind of sneaky or leaky sexual energies that, and it's interesting because my husband is in sexual recovery himself, and I am, and so we're hyper aware of this, and it's so awesome because we'll go to an event and someone will come. Like I remember a time when a woman came and sat by him, and there was just this thing happening with her hair next to him, kind of, and she brushed his she brushed his shoulder accidentally. It's just that very subtle. It's not like she goes, hey, want to go have sex or something, but it's just the energetic. And he turned like this in his chair, and I was like, oh my god, I love this man. Like, he didn't shame her or anything. He's just like, he just turned in his chair. And that's what healthy men do. They just boundary. And women too. I can just turn, I don't have to go there. It's awesome.
Don't have to address it. Don't have to engage it. Just, no.
Not today.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Yeah. Good luck with that. Maybe not good luck with that. That's not the right thing to say.
It's a man. I can understand, like,
yeah, don't say good luck with that. Don't say that. That's a bad thing to say. Well, thank you, Staci. This has been wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up? Oh, do you want to talk about the Unicorn Believers Club?
Oh, I do. I do.
Okay.
So a couple of things I want to talk about what I'm up to now. So as you know, you have been very inspirational to me in creating more resources to try to bring people together, because you have done it and you've said, hey, this isn't happening. And it was part of my revelation of like, we do need to do more. And so I have been looking at what can I do? What's my part? What do I have to offer? And because I've been working with women since 2006, I feel like I have this clinical pilot program to offer. So I'm intending eventually to offer an online certification program for therapists who want to be known as specialists in working with female sex and love addiction. So I'm kind of doing that project. And part of what I realized as I was thinking about that is, well, the women are not very connected, even professionally. Like, how do we share resources of what's out there? Like, what are the resources that I can point people to if they want to learn? And so this, the interview that you did with Forrest Benedict, where you and he were talking about how rare it is for women to come into treatment, and that's more therapy he was talking about than coaching. I think there's a lot of women who find coaching much more accessible and helpful. And so I'm so excited to see the work of you and Amy Smith and some of the other coaches who are saying, hey, let's do this. But when you and Forrest were talking, and he said these women coming into therapy are as rare, they're like unicorns. And when I heard that, my heart just was so warm, because I thought, oh, instead of the shame, which of, oh, these women are so hard to treat, or they're all wounded. And it was this idea of how precious these women are, and that we want to hold space for them, and we want to create resources for them. And for me, I want to get therapists ready to treat them when they do come into therapy. And are we really ready? Or are we just recycling the same tools that were made by men for men, and everyone trying to adapt them? So this group idea came to be because I love to try to network. Is what if I invited, lots of people I know who are specialists in the field to come together in one group? And can we break this barrier of, I'm a therapist, I'm a coach? Can we come together and say, I'm a professional working with women, and I have something important to contribute, and I want to do that, and I want to learn what you're doing. And when we all work together, we're going to be able to serve women more. Because I believe there are millions of women out there, and they have not gotten the awareness because of lots of reasons: stigma, no mirroring in society, no public education, the things they lose if they admit they have a problem. Just there's so many barriers for women to get into treatment. But when we start breaking those barriers down, wanting to have a network, a loving network for women to come into. So the group is a group online. It's like a listserv, and it's called the Unicorn Believers Club. And I got the title actually from the unicorn was the concept, and then I found this this little lunch.
Awesome.
And it says unicorn power, dignity on the side. And there's actually this, I didn't share this with the group, but it says the unicorn code. And it says unicorns never cheat. They always lend a helping hand. They always consider the well-being of the other. They respect the earth. They're never late. Okay, this isn't ideal.
We don't need to talk about that.
Yeah. They aren't conceited. They don't judge people. They give 100%. They only use their horns if they have to. I really like that one. And they respect their bodies by living cleanly.
Wow.
So that, to me, that was like, I thought, okay, so those are some principles of the community that I'd love to see kind of waiting with open arms to welcome women when they're ready to come to therapy, when they're ready to start coaching. And this idea of, can we come together as treatment professionals and not use our horns with each other, and just use them to confront the barriers, to women getting treatment, and cooperate and collaborate. And so that's what the idea came from. And you were an early member and obviously inspiration for the group. And so if anyone else is interested, if you're a healthcare professional, whether you're a coach or a pastoral counselor or a licensed therapist or a therapist in training, a student who wants to work with this population, just contact me. You can put my website on there, and we do a vetting. We don't just allow everyone who wants to be in, they're in, because we do a vetting for safety. But that is a resource for professionals to support each other, because as we know, the women have had a very tough time who are dealing with sex and love addiction or intimacy struggles. And so it's painful at times to work with them and witness their grief and support them through their healing. And so the caregivers need care so that we can be on and present with the women who need it. So that's what that group is for. And yeah, I'm happy that we're meeting. It's been going well. I've gotten great resources already just from being on there and looking at the posting, and I felt closer to you because of it. And of course, there's a conference that we're talking about putting on, which is really exciting. So
we're not just talking about it, Staci. This is happening. We decided. Do you remember? Jill's like, we're doing this thing. I'm like, yeah, we are. And Liz was like, right. I'm going. No, it's a thing.
We are putting on conference in 2020 for providers of female sex and love addiction care, and we're going to come together in person. And that conference idea was yours and Jill's, because you wanted to meet in person because you just have an affinity. And so the whole conference idea is born out of like love and healthy attraction of, I want to meet you, and affection. And so that's the spirit of what I want our treatment providers to be offering for women. And so I'm excited about that.
And I love, Staci, I love that you started this and you were like, oh, look, this could be a thing. And then you made it happen. And there's such a spirit in that, in the Unicorn Believers Club. There's such a spirit of collaboration. And hey, guys, like someone had posted, hey, what resources do you have for women having healthy dating, healthy sexual dating relationships? And like, everybody starts like throwing all these really great resources, and then people start like combining things and being like, here, I combine this and I got this. And oh man, like no competition, just let's help women heal, and let's let go of ego. Let's not use our horns. Let's just help women heal. Oh, it's so cool to watch and be a part of. And there's a conference.
That's right.
So exciting. So I so appreciate that you started that, and exciting.
You are so welcome. And thank you for being a part of that and inspiring just let's get more resources out there. And if we work together, it's easier to do that. Like this one.
Yeah.
Fun.
Well, and the thing is, there are so many women, like there's not a lack of women who need the resources we're creating. and they need different types of resources. And there are women who need to work with a licensed therapist, who have severe trauma they need to work through, who've got domestic violence issues, who are suicidal. You know, they need a therapist. And there's a lot of women who are not yet ready to face those things, and they just need a safe space to start to get some healing. And so they'll hire a coach or a mentor, but they're not ready to face the need for a therapist yet, or ever, you know, but still providing a safe space where we can meet them where they're at and hold space and encourage them along in their journey, whatever that might look like, whatever, you know. And I push. I push. I'm like, that sounds an awful lot like unresolved trauma. I'm gonna let you talk to my friend. You know, so it's pretty awesome. It's really cool because different women need different things.
Yes, and I know for me, hopefully we can get more therapists who are designated like I really want to work with women, and I'm actually I'm in the process of creating a website called femalesexandloveaddiction.com, so that people can go on there and find a list of therapists who have training and are just, you know, say, hey, I really want to do this, and so eventually that'll be up. And I also, though, I am interested in, there's a lot of younger women who may not have the traumatic backgrounds, but are getting addicted to pornography. And those women can benefit so much from coaching because there's certain lifestyle changes and, you know, challenging mistaken beliefs that pornography can condition people to have. That I'm really excited to see, because I think there's, you know, I was talking to Gary Wilson about his work with young men who get addicted to porn, and he's worked with just thousands and thousands of men over the years. Some women too have, you know, been on his site, Your Brain on Porn.
Yeah.
But one of the things he said is a very small percentage of that population, porn addicts, ever get into therapy, but they do really benefit from peer support. And some coaching, I think, is so ideal for that population. So I don't know what your thoughts are about that, but I'm curious what you think.
Well, coaching definitely is more of a peer support mentorship dynamic. There's not a professional in the room who's got, you know, well, I know how good therapists work, and they know they don't have all the answers, and a lot of the answers come from the client. But in coaching, it really is more of a peer thing. And that, for some women, that's what they need, because that's where they can find their empowerment. And it's really hard for women, even if they don't have the severe trauma or abuse in their histories. Like, just being born a woman in this world, you're automatically disempowered.
Yeah.
And then you throw porn culture and rape culture, and that's why I think a lot of the programs written for men by men aren't helping women. The 12 Steps is amazing, and it does not teach sexual empowerment. It teaches you how to behave, but it does not teach you how to be empowered sexually. And that like, sex isn't just about sex. Sexuality isn't just about sex. It's about how you walk. It's about what you wear. It's about how you interact with other people, because you are a woman or a man or a trans individual or whatever, gender fluid. Sexuality is about how you interact with other people and how they interact with you based on what they see when they first get a glance at you. And we don't realize that there's so much more to it. And we just need mentorship and guidance in becoming our own responsible, empowered selves. I have no idea where that soapbox just came from.
Well, you're talking about, I think, the power of peer support, but also the container of coaching as a way of catalyzing that sexual empowerment, particularly if someone hasn't had the trauma background. Either it's not time to work on it, or they haven't had it, and yet they're still struggling. And I feel like there's millions more women who actually are dealing with that. I mean, if we're looking at 1 out of every 3 women has been sexually abused in a broad sense of sexual abuse, not just being born in the sexually abusive culture, then that's 2/3 of the women who need support probably around their sexuality. who may never go to therapy. So coaching is ideal for that. And I'm excited that you're training coaches. I want to see more coaches out there. And so it's just, I think that you are on the front lines of service to women in need around empowered sexuality. And therapy is a part of that for the women who need it. But hopefully we just keep creating resources for the public, and women do more of their own self-help around it. So eventually I want to do a workbook called Shadows of the Heart, and it's a guide for women healing from love, sex, and relationship addiction, so that they can have the workbook and do some things out of the workbook, and maybe with a coach or maybe with a therapist, and just again keep trying to put resources out there that women can use to become sexually empowered and look at the ways that they're not, and take responsibility and authority for what is rightfully theirs.
Yeah. That workbook sounds powerful. Don't forget to sign me up as an early reader.
Of course.
Like, I'm like, yeah, I want that workbook. That sounds amazing. Sounds really good. Looking forward to that.
All right. Well, more to come. And thank you. And let's see. I guess we're about out of time. Was there one more thing I wanted to tell you? Oh, I wanted to show you my book, because in case someone hadn't seen it, there's the cover. It says a little heart, but it's a zipper. So that's
scandalous. I love it. Love it. You're delightful.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, just thank you so much for having me. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. Your love for women is obvious, and I know that's really important for women to feel love, to help them to heal that shame and isolation. And we don't have to be shy about that. And you're not, and I think that's fantastic. So thank you.
Thanks for being here, Staci. You're awesome. So I will make sure that there is a link to getting a hold of Staci for all of you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, Lacey.